At the end of 2021, in the beginning of this year, there were at least 20 different wars going on in our world. And in fact, the war that's happening in Russia, Ukraine right now was not even among the names of the countries that were at war. From Afghanistan to Ethiopia to Yemen, 10,000s of people a year have been killed as the result of it. There's no peace in our world, and mostly because there's no peace in people's hearts. There's trouble in families because there's no peace there. There's trouble in individual lives because of no peace there. And we as God's people have the privilege to be called something that this beatitude that we're going to look at this morning carries such important weight, because Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." I want for us to look at our verses this morning from Matthew chapter 5, and beginning in verse number 3. These 8 Beatitudes that we have been discussing, really this morning, we come to the summit of the Beatitudes. We have been working toward this point, that as these things are in our life, in our characteristics of our life, this is what Jesus wants to see in his people, that we are peacemakers. That in this world that is broken, in this world that desperately needs their lives put back together, desperately needs wholeness, we are the answer that he has chosen to use. In a few weeks, we'll emphasize it even more when Jesus says, "You are the light of the world. You are the salt of the earth." Blessed are the poor in spirit, it says, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those that hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall show mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And would you say this last one with me together? Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Now, this Sermon on the Mount is really a main message that Jesus shared throughout his ministry. It is believed and understood that wherever he went and everywhere he went, many times he would talk on these very same things that are listed here in Matthew. He's teaching about the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven. And these verses in this message from chapter 5 through 7, we get the wholeness, at least to that degree, of this, what is perhaps the most important message that's ever been preached. And because of its importance, because of its significance, it would be repeated again and again and again. When we look at these 8 characteristics, I want you to remember 2 words. I want you to remember that there are a progression. There's a progression here. And I want you to know something else, that there is a continuation here. That we never stop understanding how desperately we need God. 1. And then we understand that because of how much we need God, we mourn in that condition, knowing that God is going to comfort us. And then we are meek, and that means we are surrendered. We surrender to God, and in doing so, we are blessed. And then there's that hunger that comes out, that more than anything else, we want to be right with God. I want to be right with God. And I shared on Friday night that when I was growing up, and maybe you've heard me say this before, that this church that was in the neighborhood that I eventually got saved at had this neon sign on top of it that used to haunt me. I'd be riding my bike around the neighborhood, and I would see this neon sign, and it said, "Prepare to meet thy God." Scared the tar out of me. I didn't know if I wanted to meet God at all. You know what I'm saying? That wasn't a good sign to me, but of all the places, I ended up going there, and that's where I didn't find God. God found me. You know what I'm saying? God wasn't lost. I was. But as you look at this, blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure in heart. And then, blessed are the peacemakers. They are progressive, and it's almost like they're steps. But there's always going to be these elements in our life that need to be maintained. We want to continually hunger and thirst. We want to continually be merciful. We want to continually have these things existed in our life. But what is also important for us to see, there's also a reverse aspect of this. I'm getting ahead of myself, so let me just back up just for a moment, because I want to make sure that I give this the way that I put it together. When all of these attitudes are evident in our life, it brings us to this one here of being peacemakers, and it gives us this identification with the Lord, that a clear identification. God says we are his children. We are his children. And not only does God say it, people say it. As I may make mention again, there were 2 funerals that I was in this over the weekend. Friday night, Barb and I did the service for Peggy Frazier, who had been part of Bethel for a real long time. And it was so beautiful to see the testimony of these women's lives, that it was evident that they had served God. It was evident that they had served God. One of the brother came up and said, "I'm going to ask you questions, and all the answers to these questions are going to be no. Was there any doubt that my sister loved Jesus?" And no, there wasn't. Was there any doubt that she wanted to serve him with all of her heart? No. When we shared and when we saw this, it just reminded me that surely there's an evidence. There can be a clarity. I belong to God. They belong to God. And then let me go to where I was headed, and it's this. There's a reverse progression, a reverseness of this that can help us, because sometimes I don't feel as merciful as I should feel. Like, I'm not going to show mercy to that person. And there's a sense that, like, they've made a mess, so what? When we feel that way, we need to back up. And we need to realize, whoa, I don't realize how much mercy has been given me. I don't think there's anyone in this room that would want their life displayed on this screen and saying, just not pictures, just lists of things that we have done, thought, reflected on, considered, whatever word you want to use. But we have been flooded with mercy. And when we realize, then we can give mercy, and then we can take a step further, because we have received mercy. And because we have received mercy, we know that our hearts have been made pure. And when our hearts have been made pure, we know that we can give we can become peacemakers. See, we back up and get a clear understanding. When we, people are going to aggravate us. If that hasn't happened to you, it will. All right? We all will be aggravated. There are always going to be situations. But in the midst of that, we are reminded of how much mercy God has given to us. We know where we would be. We know where we would be. I was destined to be an alcoholic. That was I was headed. And God had mercy on me. My father drank. My uncles drank. My brothers drank. It was always there. I was destined until God stepped in. And by his grace, I have never been drunk in my life. That's only God. Now, I may have acted like I was, but I wasn't. I had an associate that said, I don't want to get drunk. I don't want to get drunk because I want to know when I'm having fun. And remember when I was having fun. There's a book that's written by a bishop named Handley Mole. It's written probably 150 years ago. And the title of the book is Thoughts on Christian Sanctity. Probably not a real popular title would be today. But in this book, he talks about the things that can help us to move toward being more Christ-like. And to allow God to God's will and work to grow in our lives. And he, in his book, he gives three things that I think that are extremely important. And these three things are aims. Can you say that with me? Aims. Limits. That's about 10%. Okay, let's try this again. Aims. There you go. Limits and possibilities. Now, this is what he says. In our Christian life, we need to have aims. And it happens when we come to God. When we come to the Lord, we want to be like him. God is doing something in us. And so there is this desire to be like him, to live the life that he wants us to do. And we become new. The scripture talks about it, the newness that he gives to us. And so our aim is, Lord, I want to be like you. Now, we're not talking of perfection, as we'll see in a moment, but we're talking about direction. This is the aim of our life. I want to love God and I want to love others in the way that I should. I want him to be honored in my life. That is our aim. And so we move in that direction. But we also understand, as the author says, there's limits. There's limits. There's not a limit to God's grace. There's not a limit to God's power. But we know that ultimately perfection is going to be experienced in heaven, as we've looked at different times at 1 John 3, that when we see him, we're going to be like him. Paul said it like this. He says, I press toward the prize. He says, not that I've already attained. Now, if there's anybody that would have been close, it would have been the apostle. But he realized he hadn't got there yet. He realized in this world, because of the fallen flesh, there's going to be limitations. There's going to be limitations. But we keep moving forward. We keep moving and keep desiring that. But we realize that, see, some people feel like, well, I can't live the life, so I quit. Or what's the use? No. And then there's others that try to find a way where, tell me exactly what I'm supposed to do because that's what I want to do. And And they become so rigid because they think it's all outward, and instead of realizing it's an inward thing that comes out, they know that they can never reach it. They know they can never reach it. And so they give up. We understand we're on a journey. And that's what this author says. This should be your aim. But we're on a journey. And there's limitations. We know. As you take the most godly among us. You know, those whose lives that have fought the good fight and are still fighting it, they would tell you, I'm sorry, I'm not there yet. I'm not quite there yet. And that's the way that it is. But then there's the third word he says, the possibilities. Don't minimize the possibilities. At the close of the message for Peggy on Friday night, I said to the folks that were there, Peggy lets us know that there are still a lot of good people in this world. People who have surrendered to God and know that God is still working. And we just don't stop. The possibilities of having God work through our lives. Connie and I received a text this morning for someone who said that our lives has exampled Christ to them. It means the world to us. But as soon as I got the text, I said, if they only knew. But that's the way that it is. But the possibilities that our light can so shine. And that is what God does for us and wants in us. We embrace the aim or aims. We recognize the limitations, but we go after the possibilities. I can be more like him. I don't have to blow my stack all the time. For some of us, half the time would be good, all right? Then we get down to a third of the time, all right? But we can. And there is a beauty when we have realized that we have experienced the fruit of the Spirit of self-control in our life. What a difference. What a difference. And both Peggy and Steve's mother-in-law, Mary, evidenced that. The testimonies yesterday morning at Steve's mother-in-law's funeral they were just over the top of her life and how she shared and how she lived. We want that kind of testimony. We want that kind of testimony. And perfect? No. But yet, the things that our children, grandchildren said is what anybody would want to be said about them. You can't buy that. You live that. You live that. And that's what we desire. One more thing that I learned, and I hadn't seen this before, that in the New Testament, every time you see grace and peace together, grace is always said first. I went through this because I'd heard this and I said, I got to check this out for myself. Now, sometimes the word peace is by itself and sometimes the word grace is by itself. But when they're together, you don't have peace and grace, you have grace then peace. And that is such a wonderful thing that when we receive the grace of God in our life, we understand what God has done for us, then we experience his peace because we have experienced what he came to give. And as a result of it, there is a peace that passes, as we know so well, passes understanding, and we experience that peace. Now, when it comes to this beatitude, and when it comes to this whole concept of peace, I mean, it is so big. There's no way to be able to exact all the things that you'd want to talk about and explain in this and consider. But I just consider a privilege just to be able to address it to some degree. Jesus spoke of peace so often. He is presented as the Prince of Peace. The angels said when he was born, peace on earth. He gave his disciples peace. You're familiar with John 14:27, where he says, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. But in order for you and I to be peacemakers, we need to have and possess the peace of God. You can't give what you don't have. You can't give what you don't have. And so let me give a couple thoughts as I've kind of put some points to hang some information on and some data on and some truth on. But I want to talk about it like this. I want to talk about the peace of God that is personal, that's powerful, and that it's permanent. Let me just say this personal peace with God, when I have peace with God and you have peace with God, it releases the peace of God. And we get the peace of God when we make peace with God. It says, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Meekness, the meek surrender. And when you surrender and submit to God, recognizing and willingly recognizing his control over our lives, that church is making peace with God. It releases the peace of God into our life. We just need to stop and surrender. Surrender. Told you the story when I was a younger pastor. I'm not an old pastor yet. Someday I might be. All right. But when I was a younger pastor, I remember sitting at my desk and wanting to preach on surrender. And it was one of those, I just couldn't get through it. And I'm sitting on my desk, and finally the Spirit just prompted me, and he said, son, how can you preach on something that you haven't done? And I fell out of my chair and onto my knees and said, God, I surrender. I surrender. Now, you do it more than once. Because we still got this, all right? And probably more important than that is we got this. And because from the abundance of the heart, what happens? Oh, so what's in our heart? But surrender. Personal peace comes when we surrender to him. When we surrender to God. See, he's not against us. It's not like he's holding out. Oh, if I give my life to God, I'm going to lose everything. No, you're going to gain everything that you ultimately need. This is a good definition of peace for you. The peace of God is best defined as God's highest good for you. God's highest good for you. And in Romans chapter 7 and verse number 15, it ends with this phrase, but God has called us to peace. What does it do in us? I mean, it causes us to be able to stand in the storms, to stand in the midst of suffering, to stand in the midst of difficulty. It allows us to be able, when we are not clear and we're uncertain and we're in the unknown, what am I going to do? God's peace gives us the ability to stand. It's in us. It's in us. Because we have the peace of God, we don't have to understand everything, because we know that he does. The question, which is critical for all of us, is that have you made peace with God? Have you made peace with God? Second thing I want, is I looked at this, is that peace this thing is powerful, because the peace of God it's life changing. It's not just the absence of trouble or conflict on the inside. It is a wellness. We sing the song, it is well what? With my soul. It's well with my soul. There's a wellness in the midst of what we go through because we have the peace of God. Another verse in Romans 15:33, it closes like this. Now, I just like it when you can translate that word now, the word day in the language. Now, the God of peace be with you all. Some of you need it right now. Right now. And it's available right now. And then one of my favorite and encouraging verses is at 2 Thessalonians 3:16. It says, again, day that now may the Lord of peace himself give you his peace at all times and in every situation. There's so much. We have the privilege as peacemakers to offer peace that is life-changing. It is the highest blessing that we can give. The third thing is this peace is permanent. And this is what I want you to capture here. There's a difference between peacekeepers and peacemakers. The United Nations has a peacekeeping part of it, that soldiers go in and they only go in to keep the peace. They can't make the peace. And there is a difference. We're just not separating enemies just to say, let's slow down. No, because that kind of peace is temporary. Now, I know that any parent, there's probably been times if you have more than one sibling or more than one child, they're going to be in conflict with each other and you have to separate them. All right? You have to separate them because you want to keep the peace. But see, we are God's peacemakers. We are wanting peace that has a lasting value to it. We want to make peace, not just keep it for a moment. We want to make it so that it lasts in a person's life and in a situation. And that's what we have to offer. People are in conflict with God, and we are called. We go through all of these Beatitudes to get to that summit place that God says, I entrust you to be peacemakers in this world, and you will be my children because people will see that that's what you're after. You want people to get right with God because you know that's the most important thing to happen in someone's life. If they don't get right with God, they're destined for an eternity without him. We want people to be right with God. And so we are peacemakers. It's been said of me, and maybe you walk into a room and they say, well, here comes trouble. We want to truly say when we come into a room, here comes a peacemaker. Here comes a peacemaker. someone who doesn't run from the trouble, but runs to the trouble. I was listening to a question and answer session this week, and a little boy asked the pastor, "What is heaven going to be like?" And the pastor told him that he had never been there, so he couldn't know for sure. But that if you look in Revelation, the end kind of gives a description of heaven and what will be there and what won't be there. And then he told the young lad, he said, "Heaven is an eternal moment of the best that you could ever imagine." And he said, "There's no time in heaven. Everything about you and I is gauged on time. Time. Everything is, but in heaven there's no time. It's just one day. One day." And then he said to the young man, "Think of the happiest day you've ever had. And then multiply that by 10,000, and that'll give you an idea of what heaven will be like. There's no passage of time on the other side." We can't relate to that, but that's the way that it is. And there have been some moments in our life that have been just beautiful like that. Sometimes in the midst of some maybe conflict, and then peace came. You know, I think of some of the happiest moments in my life really weren't so much, it was more of a vicarious happiness because it was something that happened to somebody else that I was part of. Those of you who remember Junior Bible Quiz, Steve, when our kids won state, I was beside myself. I had nothing to do with it outside of almost getting fouls because I was shouting too much behind them. But when we won it, I was happy because of what it was for my son, and what he received. But I suppose one of the most joyful moments I've ever had on this planet, one of the most, you have many, but it had to do with a very difficult situation I had to face as a pastor. Now, I get paid for the 5%. 95% of what I do, anybody can do. All right? I mean, do you need lights? Yeah, we probably need lights. Do we need chairs? Yeah, chairs would be a good idea. You guys can make those kinds. We can make those kinds of. But there's the 5%, it's that gray area that pastor has to say. I have to say because of my position, whoever is in this position, whoever's in the lead position in any business. There was a board member, not here, that was part of the church. And one day, he just left. Didn't tell his wife, just left. He left with another board member's wife. And they were gone. 10 years later, now I'm the pastor. This happened before I came. Not here again. I'm the pastor. They come back. Now, we were having 2 services at the time, and so there was an option of what service they could attend. But his wife, his first wife, because they kind of got divorced in proxy, because he had never spoken to her since the morning he left. They had never spoken. The next time she sees him, he's with this wife lady, and they're sitting in church together. What's a pastor going to do with that? I'm going to go stick my head in the sand and hope everything works out. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to give that to Pastor Ron. He'll figure it out. But Ron wasn't there. This lady, probably for the 8 years or better, had just done nothing but, just served and worked. But she met a widow in the church, and now they had gotten married. But there was this tension. So I brought him into my office because sometimes you got to deal with stuff, all right? Well, that's the 5%. Let pastor take him in the office. I'm going to get some coffee. You know what I'm saying? And I brought him in my office, and they sat down. This is the first time they had spoken, this husband and wife, since he walked out 10 years ago. There had not been a word said. So what am I going to do? I could have just said, look, listen, too much stuff has happened. You need to go to another church. And I could have done that. And that wouldn't have been wrong. But I was confronted with this. And so I began to talk to him. And I said, if this thing is ever going to work out, there needs to be some confession and some sorry. And more than sorry, I was wrong. And that former husband, there in my office, asked his wife in front of the woman he left with, in front of them. And they all knew each other. They all knew each other. Ask her to forgive. In the bigness of that woman's heart, she forgave him. And those kind of moments, I don't like to linger on in that. I like to get to the point, talk to them, have this thing, so that the next time that they see each other, things have been settled. And so I said, and the meeting was probably 20 minutes or so. And I said, let's pray. He gave it, she received it. We understand that. There was an agreement in there. And God's presence was there. I prayed with them. And they left. When they left, I came out of my office. And you know what I did? I danced. Right there in the lobby, I danced because I saw God and I saw peace possible in something that in this world is not normal. Not normal. The pain that he caused, the audacity to do that. But the grace that woman possessed healed and brought hope. And my friend, that is part of the peacemaking that we can be involved in. It's hard work to be a peacemaker. When you're trying to talk to somebody that doesn't want anything to do with God, but yet you know they need him desperately, it's hard work. It's not easy. But we are ambassadors for Christ. That sounds familiar. Christ ambassadors. We are his ambassadors. And you know what we bring to this world? We bring his peace. All of this, these Beatitudes have been working up to this platform to say, blessed are the peacemakers. They'll be called the children of God. My friend, that